We are back, we hope, for a weekly podcast. It is July, so football season's right around the corner. It's a UNLV All Access podcast. Caleb Herring, analyst, co-host of the Barry Odom radio show, also former quarterback with the Rebels, is up. Steve Cofield here, sideline reporter and local host on ESPN Las Vegas, as we get a chance to start breaking down some UNLV football. It's not as if the last 2 months have been slow. It's crazy. College football is basically like a 11-month-a-year gig now. Something's always going on with the recruiting window seemingly open all year long. But Caleb, football season's right around the corner. We were just talking about the heat this week. It's starting to dial up, and it kind of reminds me of getting out there in August. And all I'm doing at training camp is walking around. I know I'm hot, and listen, you got to go through this. This is hell coming up weather-wise, but that's what you go through. That's what Barry Odom is going to go through. That's what the staff is going to go through for the first time, most of it, and the players are going to go through it. So it's heating up, and that means football is right around the corner.
Yeah, for the Vegas heat hits you different for the first time for sure. I mean, I remember, the mistakes of wetting my cleats to think that the turf would cool off because of that. Don't do it. To anybody listening, it actually makes it worse. like boils your feet. The blisters that come during the summer and on the hot turf, new turf, it will be a fresh turf for UNLV come fall because they are doing some turf renovations at Fertitta Football Complex right now as we speak. But fortunately for me, I only had a few days a year in Vegas actually for summer camp because we used to go up to Ely, and which was a lot cooler up in the mountains up there. It was a nice 70 degrees. Mountain air was a little thinner, but definitely cooler and helped make those 2 days back in the day a little easier. But there's no doubt that the Vegas heat is a shocker. Unless you've lived in Arizona, I guess would probably be the most equal comparison weather-wise. Phoenix area, but for the people who have never lived in Vegas, there's some people from all across the country that are coming to their first fall camp with UNLV. It's going to be a shock. It's going to be different. There's going to be some adjustments definitely being made. I know it's some summer workouts are going on right now during these next few days, and the temperature's getting up into triple digits for the first time this year. So it's gonna be new. Hopefully exciting. Hopefully it doesn't intimidate or scare anybody away. But definitely something to adjust to in the summer months.
If you're not in shape, those first couple of days, you see it, man. There's some guys out there vomiting because they're going to run and run and run to make sure they're in shape on the front end. And you mentioned the new turf over at FFC. That's kind of interesting. I'm not sure if that was a budget allowance because the athletic department did better financially. We had talked about one thing with the football program. Everyone has this sinister conspiracy theory about why the first game of the year last year got bumped. Well, they had an offer to move off that date for a lot of money, so that was a big fiscal addition to the year. Or maybe, I hate to keep going down this path, when you're all working in a line from top to bottom, when the coach, the AD, up to the president are all working together, maybe things are a little easier to push through, and maybe that's where they got the money for the field. But I'll find out. I'm guessing it was more the budget season. And that field, as you look out from Fertitta towards the two practice fields, one of the main fields they work on was pretty freaking beat up. So they laid down the turf about 2 weeks ago. So speaking of two, we're 2 months away from the opener, exactly 63 days until they play Bryant, and then they play Michigan on the road after that. And we were going to break down position groups. So it's good to have Caleb in as a quarterback because, you guys are the main guys who have to work with new receivers, elevate the current receivers, and we'll get to Doug Brumfield's role in this and Jade Mayava as well. But the wide receiver room had a ton of turnover. It's funny. We talked to Dell Alexander a couple weeks ago, and I made a list and kind of my depth chart, and I did it off of the summer roster up on the website for UNLV, and it's been adjusting all the time. And they don't send out, hey, so-and-so is gone, so-and-so went into the transfer portal, and I completely whiffed and missed and forgot. When I looked at the roster, I wrote out the experienced receivers. It was Ricky White, Jacob DeJesus, who's not, has only been with the program since the spring, but Zyle Griffin, Seneca McKee, and I only had four, really experienced receivers who played. I forgot about Jeff Weimer. Yeah, Weimer was off the roster. They don't announce stuff like that. A couple days later, then it starts to pop publicly. That is a loss this close to the season. And from what I hear, this wasn't a, hey, gentle nudge, leave, because we've got better talent, so you can move on. This is a situation where I think Weimer scanned the room, especially with a lot of the newcomers coming in, and decided, you know what, as an older player, I'm better off getting an opportunity somewhere else. So they wanted Weimer, but he's gone. And when healthy, he's a pretty good player.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was the main thing for him too, understanding that he wasn't healthy. I think he had some injuries through the season. He was also battling injuries during the spring, missed out on the spring showcase and a lot of reps in the spring. And maybe just got the sense that he was falling behind with the talent that was coming in, especially just, lost in the shuffle. And as an older guy with very limited time left to make an impression, to try to continue or further his career to any capacity, playing time is the most valuable thing to him. Opportunities to get on the field in games and make a name for himself, or put some stats on the board to get recognized. So it could just been a personal decision. I agree. He was a talented receiver, and we didn't get to see enough of him last year, again, because of injury. I think he would have been a vital piece to last year's team had he been available for the season more. He had the shoulder injury middle of the season that he never recovered from, and I think he was dealing with something with his foot or ankle during the spring. So he just kind of was banged up for a lot of the time, but an experienced guy, a workaholic. He's a guy that was always ready and willing to work, putting in the extra effort, giving 100% during his reps in practice. I think that was one of the standout things with him when he came in last year was his work ethic was just top notch compared to the wide receiver group. He definitely led from the front with how he worked during practice. And that's something that, is necessary to set the tone in practice, set the tempo during practice. And I'm sure he was doing that during the spring in the meeting rooms, very hands-on in his learning, trying to be there. I know watching him during the spring showcase, didn't get reps on the field, but he had the clipboard walking around like a mini coach there, just completely locked in and in tune. So definitely going to be missed. It would have been interesting to see how he would have taken another step with UNLV. Unfortunately, his time's ended, and he's jumped into the transfer portal like so many others.
The experience coming back, each one has a different story. We mentioned Jacob DeJesus, who is going to be the speed guy and can play, I think, mostly inside, but he can play outside. But, man, he blew up the spring game. He looked really impressive, good hands, got targeted a bunch. When he gets the ball, he makes things happen. And then the guys who were on the roster last year, Ricky White, and you can break down each one of these guys. Ricky White, I think, has to get a little more sure-handed because he had some drops and he had some fumbles in the open field. That's time he drives last year. Zyle Griffin, I feel like, is a second-chance guy because his first couple of years, he was pretty reliable, and then last year he just fell behind on the depth chart and never really got a chance again. And he looked much better in the spring and was featured in the spring. And then there's Seneca McKee. Now his second year in the program, I think he's got a lot of ability. He is one of the leaders in that wide receiver room. So talk about all of them or talk about whatever experienced receiver you want, Caleb.
Yeah, I think Jacob DeJesus probably is the most recent name, the most intriguing name, because he is new to the program, albeit he came in the spring and really dominated the spring game from that position group as far as production and what he was able to showcase. A smaller guy, but like you said, the speed is there, the quickness is there, and the strength is there. I think it's something that we wanted to see on the field. Looking at him on paper, you knew he was going to be small. But then he has the strength and the understanding of the timing and spacing that's available to him and how to use it. One of the things, he's quarterback friendly as far as understanding, I need to break my route off. It's taking me too long. I need to break my route off, get to the open spot, make myself available for my quarterback. He showed that through spring practice and in that spring game, a willingness to go over the middle and catch balls down the seam. I don't know if that's going to be how he's used necessarily during the course of the season because he is a smaller guy. It's harder for him to maybe make himself available in those situations, but getting him the ball in space and not just in the passing game, but you can see, short motions, handoffs out of the backfield or making him, sort of just getting the ball in his hands in space, swing patterns, getting the ball out to him quick, things like that will I think be where he makes his niche. But Ricky White, you mentioned the drops last season, the inconsistency. He had some big games. I know in the opener against Idaho State was his biggest game as far as yardage and production. He had a 72-yard touchdown bomb, his longest of the year. But there's a lot of excitement and buildup around what he could have been coming out of Michigan State to UNLV. I think, obviously, for obvious reasons, people were excited about the big play potential that he had and what he could bring to the table. Now, it didn't, come to fruition last season as much as we would have liked. But that was just the passing game in whole. I don't think that was necessarily a Ricky White issue. I think the passing game struggled at times and sputtered with inconsistency throughout the season. But Ricky White, as an individual talent, stretches the field. He has speed. He has strength. He has playmaking capability once he has the ball in his hands, which I think can make a difference. He's looking to make moves with the ball. He's not just a catch it and run out of bounds type of guy. he's looking to be aggressive, and at times it did bite him in the butt. I mean, he had a couple of fumbles, and I know in the game against Cal, against Notre Dame, he also fumbled some plays that would have been big plays down the field, but coughed it up. So ball security going to be something that he's had to work on and develop. Hopefully that's the case. Zyle Griffin as a second chance guy, he's probably, just looking at him size-wise, the biggest of the guys that are returning as far as the guys with experience. He has the size. I think he's listed at 6'2". I think he's maybe pushing 6'3", 6'4", especially with cleats on. He looks bigger than, he did when he started in the program, obviously, but he looks bigger than the rest of the receivers. So there's that potential for him to make an imprint because of his size. He's become more sure-handed. I think that was an issue with him early, but in the spring game, he put on display some of the catch radius things that we like to see out of receivers, that I always talk about, at least out of receivers, that are exciting. He hadn't seen a lot of playing time on the field in recent years, but with the new coaching staff, a new opportunity to prove himself and maybe get into the rotation here, it looks like that's the case. We'll see what happens when the new transfers land and how the rotation divvies up. But Zyle Griffin definitely made a name for himself during the spring. Seneca McKee was interesting because as a transfer last year, he was kind of a surprise in fall camp as far as seeing him on the field and the catches he made and the big plays he made. It's always something when a guy gets praise from the defense, right? When the DBs recognize, hey, that guy's a monster, he's a beast. And that's a lot of what was said about Seneca McKee last fall. He didn't see a lot of minutes, didn't make a lot of catches during the season. He was kind of on that second line of wide receivers. But when he got in, he did make a splash. There were some catches that he made that were just like kind of wow, aha highlights. Not many, but he did make some spectacular plays. We'll see if he's developed and got more comfortable here in Vegas, and if he's going to make another huge splash this fall, because it seems like that's when he comes to life, is during the fall. He's a gamer, so we'll see how the returners line up. But I think, looking back at how many receivers we had last year that we thought maybe would contribute, these four, I think, while they're not the full complement of receivers, it'd been nice to have everybody back to develop them, but these guys, I think, will make a splash. And I think if they work together and they get some chemistry with Doug and the offense and look to be explosive like they want to be this year offensively, then I see no problem with any of these guys making it into the rotation.
Now, they've got two different kinds of newcomers. They've got guys who've played elsewhere at the Division I level, a couple of Power 5 guys. Actually, all three have Power 5 experience. And then there's the freshmen, which that group's a little uncertain because I don't know which of the athletes will actually be slotted at wide receiver. We'll find out here in a couple of weeks. But the guys who are in from other schools, familiar face for the staff, Landon Rogers, who is 6'4", from Arkansas. They've also got Gavin Thompson, who's a pretty good-sized kid at 6'6'1". He's from Pitt. And then Dominic Jacinto, who has been at multiple schools, was at Missouri, most recently at New Mexico State. Smaller dude at 5'9", which when we say smaller dude, that's going to be the story at a lot of the speed positions, especially at running back. But how about this group? Obviously, they're always looking for that one big target. And Nick Williams last year filled the role in the second half of the season. He was a 6'4", 6'5" guy who signed on with the Broncos after playing his final year here following CSU Pueblo. But Rogers, Thompson, and Jacinto.
Well, Landon Rogers is obviously interesting to me because of his size. I think he would be the biggest receiver that they have. Tight end, they have some size at tight end, but as far as the wide receiver room, he would probably be the tallest just coming in on paper. His story is interesting because coming out of Arkansas, he was actually a quarterback at one time. And so I've got some interest in that, obviously, because I've made that quarterback wide receiver position switch. We'll see, though. He has the athletic build, the frame. I've seen him. Not in person, but I've seen him on tape moving around, and he has an athleticism about him that makes sense. The switch makes sense. But I definitely think that there's some fine tuning that he's going to have to go through. And hopefully the time in the summer, the unique time in the summer that's new and different now to me, where the coaches actually get chances to work with these guys in the position groups during the summer workouts. Hopefully that time is valuable to him and he gets to fine-tune some of those skills that maybe more experienced receivers have. But he's going to be an interesting piece. I think anytime you have a guy who has familiarity with the coaching staff in this situation with the first-year coach transferring in, it'll be more comfortable for him, I think, especially. So he'll be able to put his skill set on display a little bit easier. And then obviously coming from Arkansas, Power 5, major conference, the work ethic, the drive, all those things may be a little bit more familiar to him. So he's going to be able to separate himself in those strength and conditioning and speed categories, perhaps. So interested to follow where he ends up being as far as the depth guy, or if he can make a splash in that number one spot at receiver. Gavin Thompson. It's interesting because he watching his social media and doing as much research as you can on these newer guys coming into the program, just seeing that he earned a scholarship at Pitt, just watching that whole presentation for him. Dan Marino got on, made a video for him. If you've seen it up on social media, I'll try to retweet it out because it was pretty cool just to see him get his name announced, and then they did like a short video with him FaceTiming his parents and kind of announcing to him that he earned a scholarship. But a guy that impressed at Pitt. And just thinking about his story and his background, these are some of the things that go unsaid. Obviously, Pitt is a program that has some history there as far as receiver goes, as far as talent goes. UNLV's landed a couple transfers out of Pitt, of course, but understanding where Pitt is, but what Pitt meant to Gavin, and for him to jump ship on Pitt, being from the area. Maybe, it speaks a little bit about what he intends to be at UNLV, or maybe the opportunity he sees at UNLV, because he just earned a scholarship. This was, last fall that he earned the scholarship. And everybody was kind of high on him at the program. But making the jump, leaving your home state, and moving on to somewhere else is probably a bigger decision than most people think. So I don't take that lightly for him. Obviously, his talent on the field is going to be what separates him. You mentioned his size. He's not the biggest guy, but he has decent size for a wide receiver. Not a speedster like Jacob DeJesus or some of these other guys whose speed is their calling card, but he's a good receiver. He's experienced, I think, at the position. He has some solid route running that he can bring to the table, and a work ethic. Like I said, guys that walk on and earn scholarships, that's one of the things that is an intangible, is the work ethic that they bring to the room and to the table. They're going to give 110% because they understand what it's like to have to earn it. And I'm not necessarily saying that all scholarship guys are spoon-fed and they don't get it, but the walk-on earning a scholarship, that story is one of the brighter stories in college sports. So Gavin Thompson has that, and we'll see if he can make a splash again with UNLV and get into the rotation quickly here in the fall. Jacinto, New Mexico State guy, again, smaller but has speed. And he's put out some videos of his work ethic and him during the offseason running routes on air. He doesn't necessarily play like a smaller receiver. And that may be something that's hard to understand until you watch him in live action. But Jacob DeJesus is a guy who I think plays as a small receiver. He understands he's small, and he plays to that dimension, and he uses it to his advantage. I think Dominic Jacinto is a guy who's smaller in size on paper, but he's not afraid to go up and get it at the high point. He's not afraid to stretch the field and run those big routes that we conventionally think of taller receivers. And just looking at his route tree and the things that he's able to do in one-on-ones at New Mexico State, those things are up as far as his highlights go. And you can watch him play as a big receiver. I don't know necessarily that's a good or a bad thing, but you can just tell a little bit about his mindset and the way he works and the way he runs his routes. It's not like he's looking to be a small guy that is quick and shifty in space. He wants to stretch the field. He wants to be a big body and go up and get those jump balls, those 50-50 balls. So we'll see how those guys add and bring their skill set to the new receiver room. It looks a lot different than last year already, and there's still some additions to be made and some guys that are going to come in the fall as younger guys who maybe won't instantly be a part of the rotation or the conversation for minutes, but down the road will definitely have their imprint on the room.
Caleb Herring, Steve Cofield, UNLV All Access PODCAST. We're back after a little hiatus. We're getting into different rooms on the UNLV football roster, and the roster's been toned over big time to the point of 40-plus newcomers in, just trying to track the players who have gone, and it's over 30 players. They basically used spring, I think, for one final examination of who they had on the roster, and then after that, they got after it, and they brought in a ton of players, and the wide receiver room is one that has some of the biggest amounts of turnover. I was just looking through the list of guys who are gone since spring. Some familiar names: Javon Wilson, Spencer Briggs, Harrison Bailey, Demikio Nathan, wide receiver, Calvin Souders, wide receiver, running back Sammy Green. Gary Quarles was in for the spring as a transfer, is already out. He was a running back. Jordan Riles, another wide receiver, moved on. Bry Ligon, who was a promising pass catcher at tight end, but just could never stay healthy, he's out. And Weimer is out. And I didn't name the other 14 guys there who are out. I think the number is 23 or 24 since the spring. So that means competitions open up. The other thing to remember is Barry Odom has mentioned, hey, a football team for him has 3 different units. It's offense, defense, and special teams. And I think a lot of the guys we're talking about at wide receiver are going to be key special teams guys, especially, remember, they lost one of their best special teamers at running back, and now I think that Thompson blends into that spot, so he could be one of the key players on special teams. So the freshmen, this is where the mystery is, and the JUCOs, right? So they've got a JUCO in Timothy Connerly, who is out of Louisiana, went to Fresno, is a high-level sprinter. Again, another small guy. And then I think the two freshmen have a chance to play. They both have good size. They're both Southern California guys in Rashawn Jackson and also Corey Thompson. So I wonder where they blend in. We talked to Dale Alexander about 2 weeks ago on Cofield and Company on ESPN Las Vegas. And by the way, if you want to hear that interview, it's up on our podcast page at UNLV All Access, our Learfield podcast page. Alexander didn't give away a whole lot. I do get the feeling, though, that there's a chance one of the freshmen can fight into the rotation. It's a pretty deep room at wide receiver. What does a freshman have to do at wide receiver to win over a wide receiver coach, to win over the offensive coordinator and Brennan Marion, win over Odom, and win over the quarterback?
I think there's a couple of things that you can do as a young wide receiver, especially. One, know the playbook. I think that's probably the number one thing, is to not be the guy that's messing up on assignment and alignment and things like that, procedural things. So just if you can come out and practice and show very early on, especially in the fall camp, that you know where to go, how to get lined up, when it's your turn to go in motion, all the cadences, where to be on your routes, all those kind of things. If you understand that quickly, that's the first way to into a quarterback's heart, right? Like, is to get that trust. Like, I know where I'm supposed to be. I learned the playbook. I take it seriously. I'm not going to be the guy you have to tell to get on the ball or get off the ball, or personnel packages. I'm not going to be the one confused when it's 11 personnel versus 12 personnel. I know where I'm supposed to be. That's number one. Number two, I think the easiest way, and this is, something that's maybe not everybody's skill set, but the first thing that I know when I notice about a freshman is the speed. If you can showcase your speed and be the fastest guy on the field, or separate yourself with your speed, that is a surefire way to get onto the field. And I've seen it happen with freshman receivers where the speed is just like next level. And it's like, we got to get him on the field. We got to get the ball in his hands. Some way he stretches the field, even if he's not catching routes or catching the ball, or maybe not able to run those fine-tuned, intricate route concepts. We know he can pop the top off of defense. If he's fast, we got to get him on the field. And again, that could be in the version of special teams, because we know it's important to Barry Odom. We know special teams is not just, a downtime in practice. It's not some stepchild of a unit that doesn't really matter. It's important to UNLV. And so getting yourself and your speed on the field and showcasing it during special teams could be a way to get on the field as a receiver, because the deep ball is something that every offense wants. And if you're fast enough to get downfield and stretch defenses, any coach, regardless of your age, regardless of your eligibility status, is going to want you on the field. So that's another way that freshmen can get on the field. Those two, I think, are the easiest paths. But then again, the sure-handedness, number three, I think, comes into play as well. If you don't drop anything, if you're a magnet for the ball, if your catch radius is ridiculous, if you can be the least drops on the team during fall, because they do track these things. Like, it's not like coaches aren't aware that a guy drops a lot of passes when the season starts. But if you can show that you're sure-handed, especially when you're talking about making catches in traffic, then that's probably number three on the list. As far as getting on the field early, obviously it's important once you're on the field to be sure-handed. But that's probably how you make a name for yourself, is if you catch everything. Then number four, people probably aren't going to like this, but it's a top reason: be a good blocker. There's times where you're going to just get on the field, and it's not a knock on guys, because this is a way for young players to get experience, but just to be a blocker, just to be a guy that's going to block. They can put you out there sometimes in live bullet situations just to give the starting guy, like, let's say, for instance, it's Ricky White. He's the guy, he's the number one option. But in 12 personnel or 21 personnel, some heavy set where it's going to be a run, and they know it's going to be run, short yardage situations maybe, it turns into, hey, who's going to block? Who's going to give us effort? These are ways to get on the field. If you're going to show that you're going to block, especially downfield on those plays where it springs long runs, I think that's one way to get your coach's attention, showing that you have a willingness to stick your nose in there and get dirty and do the dirty work, even when your number's not being called. That's ways to get on the field. And then those ways turn into set plays where it's like, hey, everybody's now scouted to the point where when this young guy's on the field, it's likely a run. They're going heavy personnel. It's likely a run play. Then all of a sudden, because you've earned the trust during the season, during whatever practice reps you get, you've earned now the ability to be the guy that gets his number called on play action deep balls. And then all of a sudden, you're the one that's just making a big play for the team because you just were on the field and the opportunity presents itself because you were available to it. So those are probably my 4 ways as a young guy in the receiver room to make a name for yourself. And that happens in fall camp. You're going to come in fall camp. You're not going to be the smartest guy. You're not going to know everything. You're not going to be the fastest on the field, maybe because you don't know. But the faster you get those 4 down, the more likely it is that you're going to see the field during the fall.
All right. So we mentioned Doug Brumfield earlier. He went to the Manning camp. What happens? How important is that? What do you get out of it?
I think the biggest thing is that your name is now out there. It's floating. Obviously, you go to a Manning camp, there's top quarterbacks from everywhere, including obviously the Mannings, who just have this wealth of knowledge that maybe open your eyes to some perspective that you weren't necessarily privy to. So you're there, you're a sponge to all of that information. Some of the smaller fine-tuned details, iron sharpening iron, where your footwork, your mechanics, just getting little tips and tricks on how to get your delivery sped up or get your footwork sped up in the pocket, how to maneuver the pocket and keep your eyes downfield. Those kind of things obviously are learned. And I think when I made some of the biggest strides in my career, not necessarily going to a demanding camp, but just being around other quarterbacks and being around other quarterback coaches and being around other knowledge from the quarterback perspective helped to fine tune me. It was different to hear things from other quarterbacks. Sometimes, and this isn't the situation at UNLV because there's other quarterback coaches there's other quarterbacks on the staff, and there have been for the last few years. But I know in the past, especially when I was there were times where there was no quarterback on staff, no former quarterback, no coach that could give me from experience the quarterback's perspective or what I should be doing as a quarterback. So Doug going to that camp, I think, was huge for his development. It's a good opportunity at this level to be surrounded by other quarterbacks and just to learn from that knowledge and then bring it back and, take the good or the bad and sift through that, and whatever is applicable, apply it to his career at UNLV and to what he's doing in this system, specifically with this new offense. And then there's something to just being around other quarterbacks that gives you a confidence and gives others confidence in you. I think coming back and bringing whatever he learned there back to UNLV, there will be a confidence that his receivers see him with, that his offensive line sees him with, that really separates him as a leader. And I think that's one of the intangibles that you get from being around other great quarterbacks is that everybody's confident. Everybody has that. And you have to bring that to the table when you're in that setting. And I think they do something special at this Manning camp where the coaches or the players that are there actually become the coaches for younger guys. And I think having that experience helps him in something that I think all quarterbacks need, especially during this offseason time and during fall camp. You're the coach right now, like especially back in the day. And I know with rule changes, the coaches are actually there during the summer now, but you are the coach. And it's important for you to separate yourself as that voice in the locker room where I know what I'm doing. I know what's going on. And more importantly, I know how to communicate that to the guys on the field when the coaches aren't there, when, it's in the middle of a play or in the middle of the huddle. And the coach can't necessarily give me the adjustment or give you the adjustment, but I have to understand it as the quarterback. I have to be able to change the cadence during the middle of the game, and everybody understands why I'm doing that. I have to be able to change the play at the snap, and everybody understands why and how I'm doing that. So I think learning those things at the camp are huge. And then for the university, just to have Doug's name mentioned or to be connected with the Manning camp is something worth bragging about if you're UNLV. I know I didn't go. I can't think of any quarterback that's been to the Manning camp since me or before me even. But just having that as sort of a notch on your belt to say our quarterback's going and getting this kind of knowledge. We're willing to send them out. We're willing to let them go out and have UNLV's name mentioned at that camp. It's a big thing. It's a huge thing when you're talking about recruiting the next quarterback or the next generation for UNLV, which obviously they've gotten a head start on with the 2024 class already well underway. But having Doug there and having his name there, it can only bring good things back to UNLV.
So we started out the podcast talking about the busy offseason, and that includes recruiting. I mean, we saw the staff hit the ground running and start to canvass the country The places they visited, the amount of places they visited was incredible. I mean, there was a concentration on Vegas big time to make sure there's some Vegas players in Southern California and Arizona. And then you just start seeing them all over the place. Texas is still going to be a big priority, just like it was with the Arroyo staff. And you and I mentioned 3 months ago, I was like, wow. I mean, they've got out like 250 offers, and it's the 24, the 25, and the 26 class, almost to the point where it's kind of comical. Like, man, they're giving out a lot of offers, but they covered a lot of ground, and it's starting to pay off. I've never seen, I mean, it's July 1st, 2023. I've never seen UNLV football with 12 verbal commits the July before the class is due. So the 2024 class, like I said, 12 commits. And what I like about it is they built a base with some local players. They've got a couple of Liberty players who are committed. They've got a Gorman player who is committed. Then the next thing I like a lot, and their highest recruit is a kid out of the Kansas City area, Melvin Laster, who is a top 5 commit of all time for UNLV football by the rating on 24/7. Damian McDaniel is the other guy who's a big-time recruit, and the staff was really happy on that one because they made a commitment to McDaniel, who's out of the Galveston area in Texas, to play wide receiver because that's what he wants to play. Meanwhile, a cornerback, Oregon and Ole Miss had offered. So, I mean, you're beating out some pretty good Power 5 schools there. They just got a running back in the last 2 weeks, kid out of Sacramento, who had some pretty big offers. But I'll tell you what I like. There's good size at linebacker commits. But the other thing is they're bringing in some defensive linemen. And this has always been, and this is no dig on the guys they have now because I think they actually have, it's one of their better position units. But they generally have undersized guys, and they're generally guys who have to be in the program for 2 and 3 and 4 years to develop. JUCOs are a little bit, further reach out of high school. They're bringing in some dudes. They've got commits from dudes who are naturally big at whatever they are, 17, 18 years old. They've got 3 defensive linemen committed. Another kid out of actually the same high school as Melvin Laster, Darius Bahami, who weighs about 300 pounds. I would assume he's going to be one of the inside guys, or that's what he'll fight for. They got Max Mogelson this last week, who's 6'3" and 263. And then they got a squattier dude in Chad Otutu, who's also out of Texas at 6'1", 285. I've talked to you a million times about it. You know a lot more about football than I do. I think recruiting defensive linemen is the hardest thing in all of college football because it's not just about the measurables, it's about the motor. But it does help to have the measurables, and it is helpful when a guy comes in and he already weighs 265 pounds, and maybe you have to sculpt it, or maybe he can get bigger, or they already weigh 295, 283. It sounds stupid. You can't teach size, and there's been a lot of years where UNLV football going up against elite big offensive linemen in the West has just had a tough time because they've had smaller guys on the D line.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the most physically demanding positions in football that goes underrated, right? Because you're just constantly being asked to move other human beings who are also big. And in a lot of cases, like you said, bigger than you, in the case of UNLV defensive linemen. But especially going to now this 3-3-5 defense, the demands on the defensive lineman are going to be physically exhausting, right? So the depth is going to be important. But the motor of a defensive lineman is where they make their money. I mean, you look at a guy, obviously the premier defensive lineman in the world right now, plays for the St. Louis Rams, who's undersized. He's not the biggest guy, but he has an unmatched motor. Like when the whistle blows, when the ball snapped, his violence, his aggressiveness, it's a nastiness that you have to play the defensive line position with. It's really an intangible quality. It has nothing to do with your physical size. But those guys who have it make their mark quickly. And it's one of the hardest things to recruit because you really don't know. There's a lot of times where, you look at the biggest guy in high school and he's dominating. It looks vicious. It looks ferocious on film because he's just bigger and he's able to move people easier in high school and everybody's smaller than him. But then sometimes you get fooled when a guy just has that size and then you get him around people that are his size or bigger. And it doesn't look as ferocious anymore. It doesn't look like he has that fight in him, that dog in him on that defensive line in those trenches. You have to have it. It's mandatory up front. And I think this staff, especially the defensive-minded nature of this staff, the way Barry Odom is built, the way he's wired, the way he played the position of linebacker, understanding the value and the importance of a solid defensive line in front of his linebackers, I think is going to be huge as far as recruiting to that need. recruiting defensive linemen that have that. And I think there's linemen, like you mentioned, in the roster right now. Before Barry Odom came, there's smaller guys, but they definitely have it. And guys that like Darius Johnson, who contributed last season, and with the limited depth with injuries to guys who were expected to be top contributors on the defensive line, hopefully having them back in the fold this year to complement the guys that are transferring in. But looking ahead to the recruiting classes of the future, these are the positions that you need to get a head start on. I think having these guys figured out and locked in as early as possible is huge for a lot of different reasons. But I think one of the biggest pluses is, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but getting a head start on the freshman class, on the guys that are in high school now, that will probably be developmental processes going forward for 2024, gives you a head start in a sense on whatever the transfer portal looks like next offseason. So instead of having to spend the time between, the college football playoffs and that 45-day window where the transfer portal is wide open, maybe it's down to 30 by next year. But that transfer window time, you don't have to dedicate as much time to the high school ranks because you've already kind of got a head start on the 2024 class. And those high school guys have already sort of committed to you, have your thumb really on that already. So then you can maximize transfer portal time when it opens up next time. So maybe that's an unintended thing. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe it's a part of the plan is that, hey, let's knock out a lot of this 2024 class, these freshman recruits early, especially when we're talking about D linemen. Let's get a head start on them so that come transfer portal time, we can be 100% committed to digging and researching on the transfer portal.
Bryant is up 63 days away from taping, September 2nd. By the way, the schedule this year, much more accommodating for people who want to go to day games. Believe it or not, after all the night games last year, which I think some of the games were poorly attended because the games were just too late for a lot of people to come out on a Thursday, especially if they wanted to come out with families. So you get your wish. Most of the games are on Saturday, and they're on Saturday afternoon. And, unlike Sam Boyd, the temperature-controlled Allegiant Stadium makes it easier to play during the day. Let's close with this. As camp comes up here at the end of July, I'll throw something out that I'm looking forward to and think on it for a second. If there's something especially you're looking for in terms of seeing some players, I am really excited to see a couple of the young guys, because we talked a lot about these guys after the spring game. And, yeah, Jacob DeJesus was awesome as a wide receiver in the spring game. I think people are going to be shocked to see how much playing time one of the Arroyo commits, Blessing, Alualu, Tui Alamotu. I'm going to get it down. I will get it down.
Yeah, we'll have it by fall for sure.
Yeah. Blessing out of Hawaii is a monstrous kid for a freshman. We had commented at the time, he's listed at 6'2", 230, and I think like 195 of it is his lower trunk. His legs are gigantic, but they like him. They had him on the field a lot. And then, health willing, I think the guy who's going to make the biggest impact amongst the young dudes, and I know coaches freaking hate this so much, but on a team that's playing a 3-3-5 and is going to have defensive backs and safeties all over the place, they gave a lot of looks to Cameron Jenkins, a kid out of Texas. They like him a lot. He's another guy with good size. So I know you agree with those. Do you have anyone or anything that you're looking for in particular as camp opens up?
I want to say just the defense as a unit. I'm excited to see what it looks like. I know the spring game, it turned into a sort of a defensive showcase for a lot of reasons. There was turnovers everywhere. The defense was new. They were flying around, obviously a step ahead of the offense, which was expected for the spring game. But I'm just excited to see as a whole what the defensive unit looks like. And this is the first time in a long time, really, that I get the feeling that defense may be the stronger of the two primary units. And I want to see how that plays out. I really am interested to see UNLV as a defensive team. That's going to be fun for me. There's individual guys who I'm looking forward to seeing. I'm Jonathan Baldwin, who kind of established himself as a leader last year. And these are returning guys that I'm excited about, obviously. But then Nick Demetrius up front. I don't know why, but I've always been drawn to him and his story. He was a heavily recruited guy when he came out, one of the biggest and highest ranked recruits at the time when he came out to UNLV, but hasn't really had the on-field time or production that maybe the hype indicated he should have. I think again, he's one of those guys with a new coaching staff that has an opportunity to kind of rewrite his story. And in this system, I think it's for defensive linemen, it's prime real estate up there in that front three. If he can get on the field, I'm interested to see. He's one of those guys, like I mentioned, who has the size, who has the measurables, but maybe didn't have the dog in him initially. But hopefully he gets it in him. I'm excited to see if he does, if he can, or if he will this year. But again, as a unit, I'm excited to see what the defense looks like going against other competition. It's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be different. And I think UNLV will surprise a lot of people as a defensive team. And it's strange to say because it's been so many years that offense has been the focus. But I really do think that the spring game wasn't just a fluke. I think it's an indication that the defensive mindset has changed. And I would not be shocked if UNLV became considered a defensive team next year.
Get your tickets at unlvtickets.com. Again, the opener, Bryant, on September 2nd. Caleb, good job. Everyone out there, thanks for listening. Subscribe, tell others, and we'll see you next week.